Hi. Um, I wonder if you guys can hear me okay. Probably should get a co-host up in here. Um, oh, I wonder if y'all can hear me okay. I'm just gonna wait for the room to fill up a little bit. Um, Feel free to request a seat. I'm gonna invite a co-host. I spent the day with my family, which was great. On the first times I've done that. It's the first day I've had a normal shower as well. First day I was on a desktop computer. Um, so 5 years for all those little accomplishments. So good day in some ways, although none of my computers would boot up, so it was pretty painful. So we're just gonna wait, let the room fill up a little bit, and then we can start chit chatting. But what else? Yeah.
So you got access to your old desktops and you
Oh,
tried turning them on.
yeah. They were pretty tough to work with. um, real funny dealing with old machines like that.
It is crazy how something just kind of feels like a dinosaur if it hasn't been on for a year. And
It's
yeah,
strange, right? They're
it's
really
very
flat.
strange. Especially, I imagine you have all this liquid cooling and shit like that. It's probably atrophying in the tubes. No.
Yeah, exactly. I had an Alienware that was fairly souped up and customized, and it's probably like useless computer at this point, and it won't even boot. So there's some BIOS problem. The CMOS is probably dead. Like all these stupid technical things. I probably need to replace the power supply, clean the fans. It's just sort of like at this point, I'm lucky to just throw everything into S3, and that's what I have, like doing a 4 hour upload right now into S3 and just moving all the files to cloud
Mm.
storage.
Yeah, I've been having my own storage issues. I moved all like, I don't know, maybe 30 external hard drives onto NAS. And that thing has now its own problems of indexing and it takes forever. And now I have to build another NAS and it's just a nasty situation.
Very, very nice pun. But
Thank you, sir.
what, may I ask, are you storing on these hundreds of terabytes of files?
Um, I just like save everything, like heart, like screenshots, like video shit. Like, I mean, a lot of it is actually just like videos I've worked on through the
Yeah.
years and stuff like that, which adds up pretty quick. But yeah, like freaking every phone I've done mirrors of all my phones. I want to do a book of every screenshot ever, and or actually like every photo ever that I've ever screenshotted or taken or every single thing in one book. And like most of it is really mundane, but every now and then you'll see some like real salacious, crazy shit, which I hope will uh, get people turning pages.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a good idea for a book, but I think it's certainly an option.
Yeah.
Um, let's see. All right, so we got some people up in here. Anybody want to ask a question or just bullshit around a little bit? Okay with either.
Hey, Barton, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hey, I had a question. So I've heard you say in the past how you don't really believe in this idea of investing, like for the average person to invest in like an index fund that just sort of tracks like the economy. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I was just curious, like, what would be your advice for just the average person that, doesn't really know much about financial markets or investing and stuff like that? What should they do with
I
their
think
money?
I think they should ignore the markets. So yeah, I have the very I think that Peter Thiel's like famous advice of, what's the one what does he say? What's the one thing that you have high conviction in that nobody else believes is true? Um or something close to that, that you can do the inverse or converse. What's the one thing you think is true that nobody else does and you have high conviction that you're right? And I think that stock markets don't go up over the long run. And that's like a very very counterintuitive and strange concept. So I'm talking about net of inflation, net of capital gains tax, and net of country sort of survivorship bias. So once you strip away all of those things, I don't think equities go up over the long run. In fact, I could argue that they go down. America obviously has been the exception. The stock market's returned 7% for a very long time. However, that is not an a priori kind of outlook. That is a retrospective post hoc piece of information that has zero, and I mean literally zero, impact on future returns. So that has happened. It doesn't mean it will continue to happen. And the whole post hoc ergo propter hoc kind of philosophy that people take with investing, like, oh, well, it's if the market goes down, I'll just buy more. That didn't work in Germany. That didn't work in Japan. That didn't work in Russia. That didn't work in Argentina. It didn't work in Brazil. And so forth and so forth and so forth. And you have to assume that our country is going to be exceptional forever. And look around. Does America feel exceptional right now? It doesn't. It is in some ways, and I hope it continues to be, of course. But I think that there is a little bit of sort of risk, putting all your eggs in the S&P 500 and praying that our country's management team, who we elect, is getting it right. And very few people think they're getting it right at the moment. So thankfully, our country's kind of bulletproof a little bit towards the stupidity of our management team. We do get to vote in a new management team every 4 years, which is a good start. And we have all the other checks and balances that keep things from going too left. So just as a company has a board of directors, we have Congress, which also sort of is a thing that needs to be replaced every now and then and hasn't done so well. And then finally, we have a court system, which is arguably our strongest sort of piece of our system, if you ask me, at least lately. So it'll be interesting to see if America continues to provide the 7% returns. But even the 7%, again, net of inflation, you're working with less. Net of taxes, which are fairly high for capital gains, you're working with less. And now you're talking about really a small pittance of return. So is it worth chasing that pittance and breaking your brain over, making a couple percent in the stock market? I don't think so. I think you'll get much better peace of mind. If you're a programmer, be the best programmer you can be. Programmers can make 10, 20, $50 million a year if they're really talented. If you're a great lawyer, be the best lawyer you can be. Lawyers can make that much money too, so like focus on what you're good at, what your craft is, and try to find a way to win there. I think that's what you should do if you want to become rich. Like, I know a lot of lawyers who are really rich. I know dentists who are rich, doctors, people who are programmers who make 100. There's the amount of people that make $100 million who work at Google or Apple that you never hear about. There are enormous numbers of people like that. It's obviously not millions and millions of people, but there are, I would say hundreds of Microsoft millionaires or tens of millions. Look at a guy like Nathan Myhrvold, who was an early employee at Microsoft. He's a multi-billionaire. You probably never heard of him. I think you'll see that it's okay to be the number 2 or number 3 or number 30 or number 300 at a company. And I think that's one of the biggest misunderstandings people have, that you got to be the head honcho and that's the only way to get rich. And that's complete nonsense. So, being number 10 at Jack Dorsey's company, being number 73 at Facebook, there's, I think Steve Ballmer was the 100 or the 84th employee at Microsoft, something like that. So, he obviously got Bill Gates' attention. So there's nothing wrong with, just finding a great company and working there and being the best sort of engineer, developer, lawyer, whatever the case may be. There's a guy on pharma, Ken Frazier, who was an attorney, and he's not a pharma guy, if you ask me. We have had a little beef over the years, but I respect Ken because he grew to become the CEO of Merck. He was the first African-American CEO of a big pharma company, one of the first big S&P 500, kind of S&P 20 black CEOs as well. So I have an enormous amount of respect for what he's achieved. We have a difference of opinion on our relative contribution to the pharmaceutical industry, but in any event, the point is, as an attorney, he did an amazing job sort of parlaying his legal work into management work and being a tremendous pharmaceutical executive. So hats off to Ken. So anyway, Ken made a fortune, right? So the point is, don't worry about the stock market. The stock market's not good for you. The stock market is a big fight between professional investors like people at Citadel, Millennium, Balyasny, Point 72, Renaissance, and so forth. The Renaissance guys have computers that will outtrade you. The people at Citadel have teams of 50 to 100 super smart guys who are picking over every piece of information who will outtrade you. You are not going to win. You may get lucky and start thinking that you're going to win, but you're wrong. And ultimately, there are people who cheat at the stock market, and they'll outtrade you. Some of those people will get caught, some of them won't, but they're still out. They're still out there, and they're hard to beat. So I think this idea, this fallacy that you can spend 5 or 10 hours a week and beat all the pros in investing, it's nuts. It's the equivalent of if you can go outside of Madison Square Garden, sign up to play the New York Knicks, but you have to put in all of the money from your 401k, and you get to play the New York Knicks today at Madison Square Garden, you and your spouse and a couple of your kids, and the winner takes the money. You wouldn't do that. You would say, that's crazy, Martin. Or it could say, okay, you know what? In Vegas tonight at the Mirage, you're going to fight Brock Lesnar in a match for MMA. And you wouldn't sign up for that. So why would you do that in the stock market trading against Steve Cohen? Why would you do that in the stock market trading against Ken Griffin? If you believe this fallacy that stocks go up over the long run, sure, there's plenty for everybody to win. But again, ask yourself, why do you believe in that fallacy? Is it because it happened before, therefore it'll happen again? Well, that's like saying, well, it rained yesterday, therefore it's going to rain today and every other day in the future. That doesn't make sense. There's no kind of first principles, as is now a common term, but I called it governing dynamics. There's no governing dynamics that say the market has to go up forever. That's not a machine that anybody's built. It's happened to have happened. It won't happen necessarily in the future. It may or may not. It may happen for 20 more years and then stop. It may happen for 50 more years and then reverse precipitously. It may be reversing precipitously as we speak. It certainly feels like that. So nobody knows. And I think, the idea that one of us is going to figure it out. Now, if you love investing and you love trading, great. Maybe it's a career for you. Maybe you should pursue it. But, I would just say if you're going to do it, be professional. Nobody's like a part-time brain surgeon. Nobody's a part-time, professional basketball player. You either go all in or don't do it at all. That's sort of my 2 cents. Next question, please.
Let's hear from EQTH.
Hey, Martin, big fan. Used to watch your videos back in the day. Thanks for the space.
Yeah, thank you.
I wanted to start off with a sort of generic question. I work in venture capital. I'm rather young. I'm still doing an undergrad degree, and I have one or two ideas for companies that I'd like to start. Unfortunately, obviously, I don't know if it's a good idea for me to. I'm not Elon Musk where I can fall back on some diamond mines or whatnot. So firstly, should I complete my undergraduate degree, which would take me 2 more years, or should I go for an idea? And then secondly, the ideas that I have are ideas where I sort of believe that if someone gets their hands on them, there's not much that I could do to stop them if it's someone with more capital, whether that's social or physical capital, or someone with know-how in the industry. So do NDAs actually protect you in that situation? Or is it sort of you need to really build a deep relationship with someone before you expose this idea to them?
Yeah, really good questions. And good luck with your career, no matter what happens. So I was just talking to a friend of mine who works at one of the biggest hedge funds in the world, and he's like most hedge fund executives, he's really upset that he's not, getting 2 extra zeros that he deserves this year. And that's sort of the nature of the hedge fund business. It's really, really a painful, business to be in, because everyone else is getting rich, and you're only getting rich, at sort of one log order less than they are, or whatever. You're just not making as much money as you think you deserve. That's sort of always the case in hedge funds. And I told him that the number one lesson that I would have learned in my life, it's only been 39 years, but the one thing I would tell myself at your age, or at his age, he's a little older than you, is just to take it easy, slow down, be patient. There's no race, there's no, there's no merit. It's a marathon, there's no, kind of like, how should I put it? All the opportunities you think are opportunities right now, they'll be there in the future, whether it's this idea or not. Like, you have an idea because you're bright, and you'll continue to have ideas. They're not going to disappear. The one thing that might disappear is your reputation. The one thing that might disappear is, and take it from me as a cautionary tale to some extent, I feel like, I have sort of the wherewithal to withstand some of the damage I've done to myself, but still have plenty of lessons to teach. The I think make sure that you preserve your reputation and your integrity and all of those things, because I think that this rush to sort of succeed, and I just noticed there's a founder in here who's 16 years old, and that's amazing, right? But at the same time, like, if you're sort of like so sort of possessed with this idea that you want to be successful, I think that one of the things that can happen is sort of what happened to me, is this unhealthy kind of like obsession with financial success, and other forms of success that will lead you to maybe cut corners and things like that. So I think as long as you don't have a predilection to doing that, I think you can be as ambitious as you want, right? There's nothing wrong with being ambition, whether you're 16, 21, 51, it doesn't matter. I just think, make sure you don't have a very unhealthy reason driving you. I think a lot of people who are like joining, like I joined Wall Street at 16. I've talked to a whole bunch of people in the last few weeks that are like not old enough to drink a beer, but they've gotten startup capital and stuff like that. I think as long as you're doing it for the right reasons, and it's not because you think or want or need, in some cases, to become a billionaire or whatever. Like, if you love software and you love writing code and you love building a team and you're having fun, great. That's wonderful. But if you're sort of possessed with like some number or some amount of money you want, or even worse, like you really like watching the show like Billions and thinking, wow, I could have a private jet, that sounds cool, like that's really, really unhealthy. And it sounds funny now, right? Like, I look back at it and laugh, but back then you couldn't tell me anything, right? Like I every moment of my day was spent thinking about that stuff and having in this really unhealthy mode of like, how do I create wealth and how do I like almost impress everybody else, instead of worrying about what I needed and what I really want, and who am I, really, and where do I fit in this crazy world. So I think you have to ask yourself about that. I think that the NDAs question is a good one. I really don't think business ideas are very valuable. Everybody's sort of like, oh, here's my idea, don't steal it. The real secret is execution. It's really hard to actually take an idea and make it work. And if you look at some of the most successful companies in the world, they're not new ideas. Like Facebook didn't invent the social networks. He just made the best social network. Dustin Moskovitz, really. Mark Zuckerberg was like the best product designer, and Moskovitz was a great programmer. And together they quickly made a website that blew away their competition. Nobody wanted to use MySpace very quickly. They're also great marketers. They were also great. They did a lot of things right. Probably the best thing they did was Mark Zuckerberg had the humility of listening to the people around him. That's sort of what made the company, I think, a 500 billion to $1 trillion company. And that's probably one of the hardest things to do too. And again, you learn that lesson. I think he learned it while still being a founder, which is very exceptional and difficult. Other people never learn that lesson. And that's why it's good to be like, okay, I'm 21. I'm in venture capital. Why not finish my undergraduate degree? Why not be 25 and still be a vice president in venture capital? That's okay. Like it's there's no like rat race where you have to be better than Mark Zuckerberg or you've got to be
It's
the
not
next.
about money for me. For me, it's more about I want to leave a mark on the world.
Yeah,
I want to be someone who affected a change. To me, it's not about the private jet.
but isn't that
I'd
either?
say, if anything, it's the other way around. It's about the decision making power or capacity to influence the world around me.
I
But
would
is
say that
yeah.
focus on making relationships, making connections with people who share your vision, and in ways that you don't need to enforce an NDA. Which any legal document, it's only as good as your ability to enforce it. And you don't want to go around suing people anyways. That's not the way you want to operate in your life. So surround yourself with people who wouldn't do that to you and who want to build with you and stuff like that. And then the questions of someone stealing your thing and this and that won't even exist. I think if you have a good division of labor and everyone respects each other.
Yeah, I agree with 100% with what Ryder said, but I'd also add that don't necessarily what you said is very commendable and everything, but I would just also like leave a little bit of room of doubt for ego as well, because ultimately we all want to change the world. very, very, very few people ever get to move the course of history. Even somebody like Bill Gates, I would argue, 100 years from now, we're not going to probably remember who he was. You cannot tell me like the richest person 100 years ago or the top 20 richest people 100 years ago. Like there are only
Rockefeller.
well, Rockefeller certainly was one of the richest people 100 years ago,
But
but
he's only famous because of Jay-Z.
Oh, right, exactly.
but
Well,
my point
I
is
don't care
like
so much about renown or being known. I just care about affecting the world and moving the world in a direction that I think. And generally, my ideas tend to be not just a venture in order to make money, but sort of ideologically motivated. Like I think some of the greatest ideas are like the social network that you brought up
well, yeah.
or
All I'm
such.
saying is that it sounds to me a little like it's very commendable on one hand, but again, one has to be realistic. Like as I'm saying, the amount of people who have actually influenced the course of history in the last 100 years is a handful, and the chances that you or I are going to do that is low. It's very low. I think that you have to sort of what I don't want you to do, and again, I don't know you. I think your name is EQTH. So what do I know? I'm just sort of telling you from my own perspective, really looking at you, using you as a mirror. Um, Basically, what I wouldn't want to do for myself is to set myself up for failure where I want to change the world and I fail, because ultimately, the probably the best thing you can do in life is not change the world, but just have a profitable, not profitable from a financial perspective. I really shouldn't have said profitable, but a profitable relationship with your family and friends. And believe it or not, that's one of the hardest things to do. Like after having been in prison and I'm a little bit older than you, like it's actually very difficult to be a good friend. It's very difficult to be a good father. It's a very good difficult to be a good spouse. It's these things are not as obvious as they sound. Every family I know has issues, right? So being a great person is actually much harder than being a great entrepreneur, and it's probably not quite as hard as changing the arc of the world or something like that, but it's difficult. Now, can you change a small part of the world? Sure, you could. I have a friend who was my first investor, and he preserved a huge amount of land in Mexico, Arizona, and New Mexico. So he bought so much land, he's got like many zip codes of that area, and they're going to forever be preserved as wildlife. And it's a really an amazing thing to do, but it's a small thing to do. I'd just be cautious about like I'm going to change the world. It's a very like Elizabeth Holmesian kind of, like, well, what happens when you don't? Are you going to start? Are you so possessed by that? Then are you going to start lying about it? Like you just want to be humble and like hope that you can change a very small thing, like just making the world more productive, a little bit more productive in one little area. Like think about like the people who make Grand Theft Auto for a living, like 10, 20,000 people probably have worked on that game over the years, and like ultimately, like have they actually changed the world or anything like that? Imagine working at a tobacco company, right? Very, very few people have the intellect or the luck to change the world, and I hope you do, right? Somebody needs to be the next Einstein. Somebody needs to be the next Turing, the next Godel, the next Terry Tao. I don't know. A bunch of people that we all admire and respect. And I'm also trivializing. Change is not just driven by one or two people. That you can change the world of Python. Probably pretty quickly. Vitaly Buterin changed the world, right? So I'm not saying that it's like this impossible thing. I just want to make sure your ego is sort of appropriately sort of tempered with, and just so you don't get burnt out and disappointed.
Oh, I'm privileged enough that I can be that striving for something that far up the pyramid of Maslow, as we'd say. So thanks a lot for the space. I'd leave you with one more thing before I make some space for somebody else. I think it's interesting to analyze crypto and Web3 as primarily an ideological revolution before a
Yeah.
technological one, which I think is interesting on a historical basis.
Yeah.
If you look back through society, a lot of the largest revolutions, like the Industrial Revolution or the Protestant Revolution, it seems that, for example, when I say industrial, I mean capitalism. Sort of there
Sure.
is the ideology that follows a change in technology. I think it's interesting that crypto is primarily obviously, there were some technological advancements and such, but I mean, the cryptographic field has been one of the most explored since World War II,
Yep.
and
Yep.
the internet's been around for a minute. So you could have the possibility to make sort of a Bitcoin before Satoshi came
Yep.
along and built it. And I think it's interesting in that sense to think that it really is a very unique revolution that was led by ideology first and the technology followed it. So I think it's
right.
interesting to view it through that scope primarily.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really intelligent assessment and completely agree. Anybody else?
Let's hear from Adunum. How do you say this guy's name? Adunum.
I
And
think you
then
were here
let's hear from.
I think you were here yesterday, so we want to.
Okay, maybe let's go to
No.
Scapegoat.
Hey,
No, go ahead, Ed.
um,
Just
how's it going?
good.
You made a point on, the larger funds and kind of individual investors competing against larger funds, but at the same time, I mean, the argument, I think this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as someone who's kind of been in the market since they were 16, which is one is that kind of larger funds have a diminishing return to scale where they cannot because of float dynamics and the size of capital they're managing, they can't get into smaller names or positions where there's a huge kind of value discrepancy. But at the same time, I guess what we're seeing now is a lot of undervalued stuff, especially smaller names getting taken out by private equity, so those opportunities not being there for public market investors. So, considering those two things, do you think, I mean, based on your experience, how do you think the market has changed? And, if the, really enterprising, talented, small uh, investor goes in kind of those micro cap or small cap names to find pricing discrepancies, do you think they can still succeed?
Yeah, so if you want to go toe to toe with Brock Lesnar, right? You can. You gotta eat your Wheaties. You gotta work out like crazy. You gotta train. But sure, there's nothing that stops anybody in this room from being a better investor than anybody else, right? It's training, it's technique, it's experience, it's all kinds of things, philosophy, emotions. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with, I mean, how does a professional do it, right? They do all those things, and number one, they do time. They spend as much time as possible investing. So to me, I don't think it's beyond you or beyond me or beyond anybody in this room to not generate 20, 30, 40, 50% annual returns. It's possible, but it's very difficult. It's just like playing in the NBA or being an top MMA fighter. Like, you have to be in peak condition, and most people are not going to be able to do that. If you're good at it naturally, like you have some talent, and then you cultivate that talent and you work hard on it, yeah, you can quit your job and just invest for a living. Plenty of people have become billionaires doing that. Joe Lewis, he was a fascinating character. The guy who started Caxton, Bruce Kovner, was a cab driver, leveraged a bet on soybeans from his credit card, and slowly became a billionaire and never looked back. So there are definitely people who just sort of pop up as brilliant investors. So there's certainly and each one of those people had their own strategies. Yours sounds like, can you look at some small caps and like identify a couple opportunities? Sure. By the way, large hedge funds do still trade small caps. If you work at Citadel, you could have a $200 or $300 million portfolio focused on small caps. And then again, it doesn't have to be large hedge funds. There are plenty of really smart hedge funds, some of whom, I've invested in the past, that have 20 million or $50 million, and they're really nimble, and they can still invest in the smallest of companies. So they're arbitrage somewhat well as well. But again, there's always a way to make money in large stocks, small stocks, bonds, CDS, options, whatever, NFTs, right? There's always a way to make money. It's just a question of like how much do you want it? How hard will you work for it? How intelligent are you? Probably not the most important thing. How emotionally disciplined can you be? Tons of things like that are not, you know, there's like 10 or 20 different factors that come to play. Now, if you're an emotional roller coaster, and to be honest, that's one of the hardest things I've had to deal with in my life, because the market will send you on an emotional roller coaster. When your profits are up, you feel euphoric and you make stupid moves. When your profits are down, you feel like shit and you can't work. It's a really, really tough to keep an even head. I can imagine, what some of these like NFT traders do when they see an NFT at 10 or 20 ETH, and then it drops to zero point 0.1 ETH or vice versa, and then it comes back. I mean, this kind of thing would drive you crazy. And I know there's a lot of NFT people here, so I just wanted to throw that out there. But point being that, like, yeah, you can compete. I'm not saying that it's impossible. I'm just, because again, then the word professional would be a misnomer. They'd be magicians. Every professional at one point was an amateur. I'm just saying that, it's hard. It is hard to beat the professionals doing it all day. Could you do 30% returns, 10 hours a week, while doing some other job? I would say that if you can do that, it's time for you to become a professional because you basically are a professional at that point. You're that good. Your talent is so great. Like, I do think, like, if Steve Cohen had to start today with $5 million or $1 million or even $500,000, and he was younger, although he doesn't seem to fatigue very easily, and he basically just had to start over trading again, and he had time to do it. He would be a billionaire pretty quickly. Like, he's just, some people are just that good at investing and trading. Some people aren't. Like I said, the emotional composure is so hard to do. So I do think it's possible, but my point is, if you limit yourself to 10, 20, 30 hours a week while you're also, you have a job as a mechanical engineer or a robotics engineer or whatever, doing something else, or a school teacher or what have you, like, it seems to me like you have a big mismatch in kind of like how you're allocating your resources and things like that. If you're starting to do well and you really like it, you kind of inevitably have to sort of take the plunge and do it all the time. Next.
Let's hear from Nick, the 16-year-old founder.
Hey guys, thanks Martin for this, and thanks for chatting before. I appreciate that. I guess my question kind of revolves around being successful at a young age. I'm just curious how you dealt with that success at such a young age, and kind of dealing with family and like friendship dynamics, and also what downsides you saw in that process. And if you could turn back the clock, what you might have done differently in that sense.
Yeah, so I wasn't that successful at a young age, so it's the first thing I'd say. I started working at 16, but I didn't actually make a lot of money for a very long time. Well, when I say very long, that's not exactly right, but I'll sort of give you some details. I was 16. I was making $50,000 a year, working at a smallish hedge fund, and I turned my personal account into around $500,000, and then which was a lot of money for me, for anyone, still a lot of money today. And then I lost the entire amount in basically one trade. So I went from 500,000 to zero, and it was very, very painful, embarrassing, difficult, whatever, all those things, and then some. So the next time I became a millionaire was, or well, I guess the first time I became a millionaire was around 28 or 29. And so I was young, but I wasn't your age. And, it sort of happened really quickly, and I was able to sort of like focus on the most important thing, which is knowing my industry, and maximizing kind of like how much I knew my industry, the people I knew in my industry, and so forth. And then I didn't just become a millionaire. I mean, very quickly it was, I sort of made it all in one shot. So I think in terms of family and stuff like that, I definitely, prison taught me at least that, I'd basically been neglecting my family. And I think if you see your family once or twice a year because you are working too much, I mean, it really, all the aphorisms of like, you know, you can't take it with you, and nobody wishes they, spent more time in the office on their deathbed. All that stuff's true, and I really regret kind of like, if there's one really great benefit of prison, which sounds crazy, it really reminded me of like, wow, I fucked up. I really shouldn't have been spending that much time. Like, could I really not spare Thanksgiving, or not spare an Easter, or not spare kind of like these, some people, really important holidays? But like, I saw my family for Christmas and maybe like one other, like I don't know, one or two other times in the year. And if my family wanted to see me more often, they had to work for one of my companies, and that was about the only way I could do that. And I've fired family members before, so it's sort of like, ultimately, what can I say? Like, I think it was, in retrospect, I think, family is the most important thing. It's the only thing you have at the end of the day, and making sure that you prioritize that, and then you can still be a great manager, you can still be a great developer, you can still be a great investment banker, you can still be a great a lawyer, who, all those people work really, really long hours. Like, you can still do that and be sort of a good person to your family. And I think that means a spouse, a significant other, all that stuff. So I don't know, I think that people who are really, really busy, I don't know if this is touching on your question, but people who think think they're really, really busy are often just doing just that. They're just think they're really busy. And the reality is you can find 1 or 2 hours in your day to be more productive, slow down, find a way to sort of get those important things, the really important things done. And when you are really busy, people will also notice that like you're taking your time out to be with them and you're putting your phone away and you're being a real human being. And I think that's, really important. So you can still be 16 and be growing and succeeding and not, have to be a dick to everybody and kind of like, I'm not saying you're doing that, but like, you know, you can have people in your family rooting for you, and supporting you. My family worked really, really hard to put me through the process that I went through. My whole family kind of like put everything on hold for what they were doing to support what I was doing. And I'm really grateful for that. And I found that I was being a little bit selfish over the years, and it's important to just reflect on what you want to be and who you are more than just in business. So I don't know if that helps, Nick, or you had a follow up or.
No, that I think that makes sense. I guess I'm curious because obviously in Australia there's something called tall poppy syndrome, and a lot of people like to cut other people down or ask for things. Even I'm not successful, but people have already asked me for money. People ask me to introduce them to famous people that I might have met before. How did you deal with that type of situation if you've experienced that?
Yeah, that's a great question actually, because I've dealt with that and I continue to deal with that. I think the most powerful word you have to learn in our wonderful language is no. Um, and you should just practice with me now. Just say no a few times with me. No, 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 no. It's one of the
No.
hardest things to do,
No.
but it's like everybody's gonna constantly ask you, "Oh, can you introduce me to Peter Thiel? Can you introduce me to?" Just just say no. Like it's people will respect you more. Like you can just like straight up tell them to their face no. And it's one of the hardest things to do. Guys would ask me in prison for stuff all the time. Like I'll give you a funny stupid story. Like there are these computer kiosks that we'd all have to use to write emails to our family, and I would be the only person every time I went to the kiosk. I'd bring a pen with me. Sometimes I'd bring 2 or 3 pens, and I'd use them to write, because I was, constantly looking at different data on the email. So I was like writing it down and, sort of transcribing it, and then the other way around and so forth. And I was just writing, 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 writing. And every time someone would be like, "Oh, do you have a pen? Can I borrow a pen?" And I just look them in the eyes and say no. And it was like the most like, sort of, because I'm used, of course, if I was able to lend them the pen, I would do so. But the point of the story is that like it's a really difficult thing to do, to sort of let people kind of walk all over you and sort of, you want to be a person that helps people and pleases people and so forth. But ultimately, like, in business, your job is to look out for you. If you think introducing somebody who's actually really going to help them, great. But 9 times out of 10, you're just sort of wasting your time. You're wasting your contact's time. You're wasting the person who wants to be introduced time. If you, in your heart of hearts, think this person's going to benefit from the introduction, go ahead, do it. Right? Everybody will be happy. But most of the time, you're really just kind of wasting all 3 parties' time. So I think, and money works the same way. Like, people will ask you for money nonstop. Whether it's $5 grand, 50 grand, 5 million, whatever. The answer should always, always, always be no, even if it's somebody you're really close with and so forth. Because what I've seen and what I've experienced is it just is a slippery slope of hell after a while, and you don't want to be a debt collector and a bill collector, with friends and people and things like that. So like to me, just kind of like follow those simple rules, and I think you'll be a much happier business person, to be frank. But that's just my 2 cents. You can take it or leave it. Who wants to go next?
Let's hear from Dumb Fook and then Cypher.
Hey, Martin. How are you doing?
Good. Are you as dumb as you say you are?
I think so. You just brought him up, but I was curious about what your relationship, if you do have one, or interactions with Peter Thiel is, and your thoughts on sort of his transition to influencing politics, and sort of, is that money motivated, or the reasons behind that? Any thoughts you have?
How do you know that's a transition?
Yeah, no, like, I guess because it's more public facing now.
I see.
Yeah, I don't want to comment on any specific person. So you can ask any about any specific person, but I think the world of Teal. I mean, I'll start with that. I mean, he's there's this guy Jason Calcanis, I think, is at Jason on Twitter, and he once claimed that he was the most successful angel investor ever. And yeah, I don't know, man. Like, there's a long list of people ahead of him, but like, I wanted to I wanted to ask him if he's ever heard of Peter Thiel, because he did this small angel investment where he bought 10% of a small tech company that I think he put $500,000 down, and he bought 10%, and I think that company is worth 500 or 600 billion now. I forget what the name is. I think they changed their name recently, but he made a good investment there. That was a good angel investment. And then he also did a couple other ones. He started a few companies as well. So he's he's like the Midas touch, right? And people say that about him all the time. He's the best, basically, startup slash tech slash high growth investor arguably ever. What can be said about that, right? Like, it's just facts, right? You can hate the guy's politics, you can hate the guy's personality, which isn't very hard to do. Can, you can hate a lot about him, but he's really, really good at what he does. In terms of politics, I think so many people with money. I have a stupid saying that, or it's just a framework for how I think of things. Like, in life, what I've sort of seen is like people want power in one of three ways. They either want a lot of money, they either want that, or they want a lot of power, or they want a lot of voice. And everybody who has those things wants kind of the other part of it. So all the Wall Street guys want a lot of power, which is what politicians have, or they want a lot of voice, which is what media has. All the people in media, they're broke because they're in media. So most of those people, unless you're Rupert Murdoch, most of those people, like reporters and so forth, they don't have any money. They don't have any power. They can't put you in jail. But man, they have a voice. They can ruin your life with one article. Don't have to fact check it. They can call you a rapist. They can call you whatever. And whether they're right or wrong, whether they correct it or not, even if that person gets fired, you're fucked. So it's not hard to it's not a smart thing to fuck with the media, and I kind of learned that over time as well. If you're going to fuck with them, be very careful at least. And then you have politicians. They don't have any money because they're public servants, quote unquote. They don't have much of a voice. That's why they spend money kind of on ad buys, right? Almost the entire amount of money that they raise in campaigns goes to ad buys. So they are basically just camera whores in many ways. They want to get their message out there, and they need a voice. So they often will abuse their own kind of office for a voice. And if you've ever met any politician, you know that they need money. They want money. That's like the most important thing to them. So it's a really funny, and that's why there are a lot of politicians that are really rich. For example, how is Nancy Pelosi worth $200 million? How is Hillary Clinton worth $200 million? How are a bunch of, I'm not just going to pick on liberals. We'll pick on Republicans too. Again, not exactly privy to that side, but I'm sure you can come up with a long list. How are all these people making $100,000 in the Senate or $200,000 or what have you? And then all of a sudden they make $50 million or $100 million. And it applies to Bernie Sanders, and his answer, he was actually somewhat honest, which was really great here. Ironic, but honest, where he said, well, I'm a great author. I've written a number of great books, and that's why I made $3 million, so I deserve it. And that's fine, I suppose. I mean, he doesn't sort of, eat his own cooking, which is fine. But, I do think there's a book scandal that'll eventually kind of be revealed. I have this theory that these books are not really truly being sold. I think for $1 million worth of books, they are real demand there. But I think that, in fact, I believe I know that large companies will subsidize these books in bulk purchases. Companies like Walmart or JP Morgan, who need political influence, will have no problem buying 10 or 20,000 copies of Hillary Clinton's book. I know it, for a fact. And basically, to me, that's in essence a bribe. And that's a really despicable thing. I think no public person in public office should write a book for profit. It's a really disgusting thing, if you ask me.
Isn't there something with the president that he's not allowed to write like something until after office, or am I incorrect on that? Is there some sort of
often you can't write it during office, but shit, Obama got a $50 million book deal, so it's
like the day after you gotta like exit like the premises, then you're like, all right,
correct.
sign the deal.
Yeah, and there's a whole process where you have to get clearance from an office and all this and all that, and that's fine. But again, to take that money and throw it in your pocket, and I'm not saying I like Obama. Like, I don't think he's a greedy guy that's like trying to line his pockets, but I do believe he has some very nice homes that he's purchased, and a lot of the, like I said, a lot of the people in power, they want the money, and they want the voice. So my point is that, like, I think that that's sort of how the world works. For whatever reason, the grass is always greener. So the money people, you made billions of dollars. Now what? You have everything you could buy, right? There's nothing you can't buy. Well, what can't you buy? Literally, right? You can't buy the headline in the newspaper tomorrow. Okay, so buy the newspaper. You can't buy somebody going to prison at your point of a finger, or the law changing at a point of your finger. Okay, well, let me run for office and I'll buy that. Bloomberg certainly did it, right? And a number of other people have sort of paid their way into office. Now, thankfully, the president of the United States, at least that's the one role that seems to not be for sale. People try. People have tried to buy that role, but it seems to me like that's at least the one kind of place where our votes actually kind of do, for whatever reason, get counted and matter. I'm not saying money doesn't influence the president of the United States. It does. But Obama's success, for instance, was I think kind of organic and homegrown. I think Trump's was as well. And I think like there is this kind of like inherent likability that makes somebody the president, and even probably some of the other positions that get elected. So anyway, I think Peter, people are allowed to voice their opinion, use their money how they want. That's what he's doing. Um, if he believes that that's the best path for the country, I would take him seriously. He's done well in business, but that doesn't mean that he's a political genius or that he knows what's right for the country or doesn't. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. I just don't know. But I think it's certainly for somebody that's made 5, 10, $20 billion. Nobody really knows how rich Peter is, but Peter, I think it's probably a decent hobby to pivot to after having made that much money, right? I mean, how much more stocks, and companies are you really that excited about? Ultimately, it's kind of probably passe for him at this point. To have all the Republicans in the Congress under his thumb is probably more fun and more interesting. So I would do it too if I were him, probably. But
I would just quickly posit also that I think likability might sort of be the fourth desire between like voice, power, and money. Like it kind of seems like Elon is kind of angling for that.
That's true. That's certainly true. See, for me though, it's anti-likability, so it's hateability. So I've been optimizing as hard as possible for that
Yeah,
one.
I was gonna
The
say
heel.
which one do you think you fall under in terms of priority? And I was thinking that my own read of it would be that kind of the problem that occurred for many people, many camps, is that you actually ended up mixing all three in a way that was uncomfortable, and people prefer when you stay in a certain lane and you don't mix voice with money and power and stuff like that. And
Yeah,
you're
that's
kind of
totally true, right? Like you can be wealthy in America, and you can be. It's certainly in China. That's the number one rule. You can be as rich as you want in China. You just cannot say anything, and you certainly can't say anything against the CCP, or you will get disappeared very quickly. In America, it's sort of similar. Like I did the price raise thing like 8 times before I did Daraprim, and nobody cared. Nobody bothered me. But the one time I did it and kind of like spoke my mind about it, that's where things went wrong. So I think my problem is really like a problem I think a lot of people have, which is if you could just go on mute, that'd be great because you're making some noise. So thanks. Um, so I think the problem I have, and I think so many people have this, and nobody's willing to sort of talk about it, is self-destructive tendencies. And I think Elon Musk has them as well, and I think we all do from time to time. Um, and it's especially prominent in traders, and you actually have a name for it in Wall Street Bets. They call it YOLO. You only live once. So basically, you say YOLO before you make a bad trade, and it's a bad trade, right? And you basically say, you know what, you only live once, and that's sort of like, well, hold on, you were saying you only live once because you have no other defense to this crazy trade you're about to make. If you had a good defense to it, you would say, no, Jeff or Ryder or Jeremy, this isn't a bad trade. GameStop is going to go up to 400 because they're going to make $40 a share in earnings, and that's only 10 times earnings, and it's a good buy. Now, never mind that GameStop even makes $1 a share in earnings. How are they going to make 40? But if you went into that argument, you could win it if you had a good thesis. But if you don't have a good thesis, you just say, you know what, YOLO. And I think that that's a very obvious self-destructive policy. When we have one night stands, we're being self-destructive. When we eat the third piece of cake, we're being self-destructive. We all are self-destructive to some extent. I think thankfully many of us can control it. And there are some things that I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know why we do this, but I think everybody at some point, like, basically, puts their foot in their mouth or does other things like that. And one thing I would say is that if you put your foot in your mouth, you should be able to be forgiven, right? There should be things that you can do to sort of walk it back. And I think when Elon Musk, for instance, did the 420, that he was going to buy Tesla out for 420 a share, when he smoked weed on Joe Rogan, I mean, the guy seems to put his foot in his mouth every week. And again, I think that, thankfully the world's been very forgiving to him. I think eventually that forgiveness may run out. And I just think that there are rules, like in Europe now there's this thing called the right to be forgotten, I think, where you can kind of get your social media and Google searches scrubbed and removed, where if you made a big fuck up, like you said some crazy thing, you can kind of start to clean that up and make it go away. And you should have that right. And now we're in the internet age where it's like, if I went to a party, my holiday party, right, on Christmas, for my company, and I made a mess of myself. I was throwing up. I had a lampshade on my head, and I was, I stripped down on my boxers, and everybody was like, "Oh my god, this Shkreli guy is crazy." And I went to my office the next day, and I said, "Guys, I'm really sorry. I had a really bad night. It was really embarrassing. I hope you can all forgive me." And people said, "Oh, okay, yeah, no, I get it. It's okay. I forgive you." Well, in 2022, this thing's going to be on YouTube by the end of the night, right? So, and it's never going to go off the internet. It's going to be traded and copied, and kind of it's going to be on TV before I get home, before the hangover starts. It's going to be world news. So, I think like there is something bad about that I hope that that can change. And again, we have we're sort of veering all over the place. So maybe let's just jump to another question.
Thank you.
Cypher.
Hey. Yeah, I guess it's kind of two-parted. One was just to see if you would fact check me on what I was thinking I was seeing over the market over the past 5 months, and then also what you think you're seeing as far as what VCs are going to be doing with their money, right? So, I mean, over the past 5 months, I've kind of seen a lot of downturn. I feel like we're pretty close to the recession mark when I was looking at everything like stock market to Fed money printer. I mean, the correlation's basically like way off, right? It's like 9.2. We took out $35 trillion off the global market value over the past 5 months, like 14%, right? So like everything has kind of bursted, right? If you look at it across the board from like crypto to S&P to NASDAQ, and kind of guessing that housing is next. I don't know what you feel about that. But I mean, most of the stocks have already taken a hammer from COVID to B&B to SaaS. I mean, I'm just kind of looking across the board to see where's money going to enter, right? Because money's made off entrance of fresh capital that doesn't have the legacy of a bad portfolio, right? Captured by the same people usually doesn't happen, right? So psychologically, I just don't see that. But I don't know, from a VC perspective, most VCs are spending their money on like 40% of their capital in businesses that are chasing like, I don't know, 50% losses. It's pretty bad, but then they're gambling, right? And they're going to make maybe 2 to 2.5x on something else, right? Cover their ass. But I don't know. All the VC money is being deployed. It's pretty much getting burned right now. So I don't know where you see that going.
Can I chime in on that real quick? Just from what I'm seeing, like the smaller angels and the VCs particularly, they're putting money in behind projects they already invested first and foremost. Secondly, they're taking their capital that they would write 250, like 500K checks, and they're kind of betting bigger. They're kind of slimming down on, like, if somebody would have sprayed like 200 projects last year. I have one of my friends, they did that last year, and they're like, oh, like we're gonna pick like a couple dozen this year. They're kind of changing their tactics in that regard.
That's what I was seeing too. I saw that like the regression was to, okay, we're not going to spin up and sign contracts every other week for new projects. Let's take a back seat and maybe take more than a couple months to a couple year approach. Like not a couple year, but year approach.
And some people had term sheets like signed 3 months ago, and somebody like the lead dragged their feet, and they're like rescinding offers, and it's kind of a shit show. If you had the opportunity to raise, you should have fucking raised 3 or 6 months ago.
Right, right, and that's the thing. Like, I'm not looking to just jump right in, right? That's kind of what I wanted to see if you had experience in engaging the market. Like, what I'm seeing from others is definitely take a step back and just be slower about your approach, right? Not just dive right in, but also, I mean, that's the same thing when you look at all the market, right? It's going to be a slower approach in general for us to get back to where we want to be. So,
Well,
I
let
was
me
just
just
going to be more hesitant in general.
I just want to weigh in because I mean, having seen a couple of cycles, I think the first thing to understand is that there's some things that are just unknowable, and I think this is one of them. Like ultimately, um, whether we're in a recession or not is unknowable. Usually we only know that later. And right now, unemployment's below 4%, so it's pretty tough to have a recession in that kind of condition. There's plenty of software companies that are going to grow 30% this year. For there to be a real recession, you're going to have companies like GM and Ford, Caterpillar and Deere, all those sort of cyclical companies doing poorly. So just because tech prices that were inflated have gotten kind of back to normal, that doesn't mean that we have recession. It certainly feels like it, right? Like the seeing
Exactly. That's why I was curious, like where it's going to go next, right? Because if you
now.
follow the bubble and stocks and everything pop, then usually my next thought of or train of thought is usually okay, housing, and then even after that, before everyone loses their jobs, we'll go into the plastic debt, right? Where
Well,
everyone's
housing
just going to
housing has been on fire, so I think that there's a lot of room for housing to normalize and not necessarily house prices can drop and there not be necessarily that big of a deal. I think that again you have an unknowable situation where we could see 6 months from now, inflation gets tamed, economic growth is slow but steady, and markets go back up, and I wouldn't be surprised at all. We could see in 6 months things are basically the same. Things are skittish. Unemployment's up a little bit, maybe around 4.5%. Markets are kind of sideways. Inflation's looks like it's coming down a little bit, but maybe not. And we're kind of basically in the same place we're at now. 6 months from now, I could also see that things have gotten worse. Markets are down 10 or 20% from here. Inflation hasn't changed at all. Despite Fed raising rates, unemployment's ticked up meaningfully. That could certainly be the case. And in 6 months, you could see Armageddon, where markets down 30%. Inflation's actually gone up from here, and unemployment's at
right.
six or seven on its way to 10. So like, there's no way to know ahead of time. And if I knew I'd have a crystal ball, and I'd be lying to you if I even told you that I had like an inkling, because I mean, it's obvious that risks are higher than they were before, but I'm not saying anything that's not tautological. Like it's, you know, I think you have to read things as they come in. Probably the best clue is company earnings, like
Okay.
especially the
Yeah, I
cyclical.
guess my more pointed question was what's your red flags, right?
Yeah, I like to look at real sort of like the most real time sort of information you can look at that's cyclically sensitive. So like semi-cap equipment companies, semiconductor companies are usually like exquisitely cyclical. So are auto companies. So to the extent you get monthly numbers out of like a Ford and things like that. Now the problem is a lot of these companies are in a supply constraint. So you had the CEO of Goldman Sachs actually today, Lloyd Blankfein. If you saw what he tweeted, it was really interesting. That's why Twitter is kind of amazing.
Yeah.
He basically said like dial down the negativity. It's not that bad. I mean, things are okay. Now employment is not the best indicator. That's the one thing I would say, that it is often a lagging indicator. And equity
And then
prices are not a great indicator either, though, in my opinion. I think that markets tend to get nervous very quickly and will often overshoot. I think bonds are probably a decent indicator, better than equities at least. And I think CDS, believe it or not, if you see CDS on like junk start to move, you want to look at the markets where the players are the smartest, which is kind of also kind of tautological or nonsensical. Like every market has smart players, but and stupid players, right? But in CDS, like you don't bet on CDS just for fun. Like if you're betting on default swaps because you think that the junk defaults are going to grow, or same thing with subprime and mortgage debt, like that's a really interesting signal. Like if you think that CDS blows out for a bunch of different kind of interesting companies that are already kind of at risk. Like one interesting one would be WeWork. So WeWork has a ton of debt. It'd be really interesting if they go bankrupt. Like they're very cyclically sensitive. But again, there's so much obscurity right now. Or, I'm sorry, obfuscation with things like supply chain problems, COVID, kind of like returning from remote work. Like the cross currents are like they've never been before. So actually getting a real tea leaf is going to be difficult. And the other part is everybody gets tea leaves at the same time. So, there's no way to really like get, some great edge. Who does the best research in this was ISI, um, which I think merged with an investment bank, Evercore. So Evercore ISI, the best research ever
Okay, very cool.
was yeah, it's hard to get their research. You have to be a real sizable paying client. But Ed Hyman was the dude there, and they had just a bunch of great economists and people like that. Art Laffer is another good guy to talk to, inventor of the Laffer curve. He's quite an old guy at this point, but one of the best and well-known economists, Alan Blinder, and so forth. But I think the hard part is like being a software company that loses money and is venture backed. Like you're really at the mercy of your investors, kind of generosity and their limited
Yeah, understood.
they're underlying limited partners too, right? So like to me, the beauty about software is you can be profitable pretty quickly with kind of I mean, if you have $10 million in recurring revenue, you should be able to right size your business. It might be painful, but to at least be breaking even. And again, it's painful and difficult, but you can probably get it done. The whole idea that you need to be spending $40 million is probably kind of like unnecessary and not necessary. I mean, it's going to be fuel for your growth, but like a lot of these companies have to learn how to be more frugal and just kind of hunker down. And like I don't think that there's a quote unquote like, oh, we got to be in recession mode. Like you should always be in frugal mode. Like if you can make a really really good investment that can turbocharge your growth and it's going to make you a little more red right now than you'd like to be, okay, fine. But that doesn't mean like, oh, when cost of capital is really low, I'm just going to go hog wild and we're going to, waste an extra 10 or 20 million. You should never do that. Now, if cost of capital is really low, sure, like Ryder said, yeah, top up your balance sheet, raise $100 million. Make sure you, or I think it was Jeff who said that. Make sure you raised enough capital for a rainy day. But I think that ultimately, if you can't ride out 2 or 3 years of any business condition, then you haven't really
Right.
built a business. You haven't really built a
Exactly.
business.
You got to
No,
give
thank you.
yourself 24 months runway no matter what at this point. Like in this situation, if you're going to get any money from anybody, give yourself 24 months minimum.
I would
But
say,
if you
yeah, I would say any
yeah,
situation. Like that's not a business. If you
yeah,
have 6 months of cash on the balance sheet, what you've got is a lotto ticket. What you've got is basically a prayer, a bridge that's half built that you're praying will get, fully built. And I think
I
that's
think it's
really.
like somebody said the other day, rule 1 through 10, don't run out of money in the business. That's like,
How do you say
what's
it
it?
again?
Rule 1 through 10 of business, don't run out of money.
Right. Right.
But let me ask this question. So we're going to go to this because you are ZK Enrique. So I have to ask you, what do you think about Silver McCauley and Algorand? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. I mean, I'm not saying that you should dump all your money into it tomorrow. I'm sort of more of a fan conceptually. The biggest thing is the reason I've got it is just to troll their PR person who doesn't want me talking about Algorand. So I'm going to talk about Algorand for now till the day I die. As a result. So bad PR kind of approach. I think. The last thing you should do is antagonize somebody to, kind of stop doing something. Like the best way to do it is ignore it. So anyway, I'm Mr. Algorand from here to eternity. But the point is, I actually do like Algorand. I think conceptually, like, and again, this doesn't mean like it's the best chain. It doesn't mean like it's the best people behind it. It doesn't mean any of those things. I just think that if you look at what we have with Bitcoin and Ether, we've got sort of like one completely anonymous founder, one kind of crazy founder, and then some very talented developers kind of behind um, Project One and Project Two, which have both been really successful and really smart, but not exactly like professional. And so having the team behind Algorand, who are like the who's who in crypto, like real cryptography. And that doesn't mean that it's like really like important to do that. I'm just because I think it's as important to cobble together disparate technologies, and obviously Satoshi Buterin, neither of those people, Nakamoto or Buterin, I should say, are idiots or anything. I mean, they brought together really important different technologies. They had a wide scope of and a wide sort of lens that captured a lot of and cobbled together a bunch of different tools into something really cool. But I think like again, the flip side of that is this whole like kind of like fake blockchain trilemma that was sort of brought out by Buterin, which I've criticized before. But you know, I think was people sort of ran a little bit too heavy with me kind of dissing him. It wasn't that I'm dissing him. I'm just sort of saying like I'm not sure that's a problem necessarily. Like I don't think that the scalability problem in blockchains is permanent, and I think Algorand is a reasonable start of a proof of that. Now, obviously, Algorand's fairly centralized, and it's going to take some time to sort of find a blockchain that can really, really run. And we've seen all the problems with Solana. We know the problems of both Ethereum and Bitcoin. But I do think we can solve the scale problem without it permanently affecting the other two pillars of what a blockchain can and can't do. And I think, you know, we're just early in this technology, and the stuff we're seeing coming out of like real time blockchains and things like ICP, you know, certainly Algorand I'd put up there too. Like this problem's getting solved. So I think that, you know, the crazy proof of work shit that gets done with Bitcoin is like it's so nuts that, you know, it's its own worst enemy. And I think, you know, certainly Ethereum has some of those problems, and they're legacy problems. And if you've ever worked in software, you know that you inherit huge amounts of technical debt when you have a gigantic code base done by lots of people that don't want to work on it anymore. Whereas, you know, Algorand started from scratch and had a really solid foundation. And even that, you know, is probably not going to be the answer in the long run. I do think it'll be some other chain, whether it's Near or whether it's something nobody's heard of that's cooking in Paradigm or A16Z's labs or companies. You know, there's something coming that's going to, I think, solve this so-called trilemma. And that's the reason I'm interested in Algorand, is that you have somebody who really is, you know, not just sort of like cobbling together a couple technologies. You have somebody who is, you know, the Turing Award winner for efforts in cryptography. Like this is the guy who's, you know, 60 years old, MIT professor creating a blockchain. Like I pay attention to stuff like that. It doesn't mean that it's going to be successful. It doesn't mean that it's going to beat this scrappy 19-year-old that creates a blockchain, right? That's if that were the case, the richest people in the world would be MIT professors. All I'm saying is that it's something to pay attention to, and you know, it'd be really interesting to see how kind of this all unfolds. Whether like the old heads of cryptography and the old kind of like, you know, database gurus who came up with cap theorem and the scholars of the world, kind of how they sort of solve what's a really technical problem, and whether or not they would whether or not they can compete with kind of like scrappy people maybe like you and me that just sort of have a little more elbow grease and a little more kind of, you know, I don't know, like more cunning and more energy to figure out if they can make a better solution. So I don't know what'll happen, but to me, I think that this is a technical problem. And usually in really high technical problems, the people that win are the kind of like the theoreticians, I should say, the people who are like, you know, very kind of like have their axe to the grindstone and are very pedantic and like really careful about things. It's not people who are like running and gunning on marketing and stuff like that. Like that's not going to win here. You know, I think what'll win is like a really careful and deliberate academic exploration of what can get done, what can't get done, and so that's why Algorand to me seems like something exciting. Again, I know it has, you know, huge issues, but it doesn't have the issues Solana has. It's never had downtime.
Well, let's look at that for a second, because what you're getting at is kind of like the idea of building systems that, you know, you're bootstrapping the system from proof of stake standpoint, pure proof of stake, and incentivizing people to use. That's, I think, the hard part. Like, okay, you started off and you're distributing these tokens in a certain manner, and everything starts off centralized and becomes more decentralized. And the other word, like this word decentralization, that's like, can you even define that? That's kind of the first issue with this. But like the idea of like, okay, like there's a certain amount of coins held by the foundation. The relay nodes are, you know, built in a certain way, and those 2 points, I guess you could argue about decentralization and how that can be better done. Obviously, that's you know, very relevant, and you know, we talk about that all the time. But you know, this thing about the trilemma, it's, you know, a bit of an excuse. And if you look at Vitalik's comments lately, he knows, you know, ETH is broken and all those layer 2 solutions are necessary for to make it scale and whatever. So yeah, it's really interesting. I think that the first mover advantage is huge. There's an insane amount of people that are, in every generation, there's only a certain amount of innovators. And so many have entrenched interest now on ETH or other chains like Bitcoin. Those innovators, they get stuck. And the rate of innovation is so fast, it's difficult to build a whole entire new generation.